Today I'd like to continue our journey through chapter 10 of the Gospel of Matthew. As we near the end of chapter 10, Jesus is talking about some of the difficulties that we face every day in being a follower of God. In this particular section, starting in verse 34, Jesus talks about the division that can happen when we start to follow the Lord. In verse 34, he says, "Do not think that I have come to bring peace upon the earth. I have come to bring not peace, but the sword." And as you look at that, you say, well, wait a minute. This doesn't seem to be true, truly faithful to the message of Jesus. Jesus really seems to talk more about peace. And as a matter of fact, earlier on in chapter 10, he mentions about the greeting of peace that we give when we proclaim the gospel. We give that greeting of peace to others. And Jesus prohibits the use of a sword in his defense in Matthew 26:52. And this verse, you might think, well, it's a contradiction. Well, Jesus doesn't want you to use the sword, and now he's saying he's come to not bring peace, but to bring a sword. Well, what's he talking about here? But really, this speaks more about the mission of Jesus. The mission of Jesus to proclaim the good news and what will happen as a result of his mission. That there will be conflicts. That when you come to bring a mission of good news, a mission about God's love, a mission basically of peace, of shalom, there are going to be people that are not going to accept that. And there's going to be problems and there's going to be conflicts. And we certainly see this in our own day today. We see many people who want to bring a message of peace to others, and people don't respond to that. And then you get into conflicts. And sometimes they think, well, you're just talking about peace, you must be weak, we can run you over. And that type of attitude. People that want to control other people. And so Jesus knows human nature very well, and he knows we're going to run into those situations. He knows it's not going to be easy. There will be conflict. And so the mission is one to bring peace. But what happens as a result of that mission and that message is not always peaceful, as we know. Of course, we've seen wars about religion. We've seen wars about economics. We've seen wars about nationalities. We've seen wars about power, territory. We've seen all of this lack of peace, as we see in our world today. And so Jesus knows that well, and he's making us aware of that. The sword that Jesus is referring to here could be an allusion to Ezekiel chapter 14, verse 17. As we know, Jesus uses many references to the Hebrew scriptures. And so having that background helps us to understand exactly what Jesus is saying. And that passage says, "Or if I brought the sword upon this country, commanding the sword to pass through the land, cutting off from it man and beast." So Ezekiel is talking there about the sword that is going to cause division. It cuts off man and beast. It divides. And so God brings the sword, in a certain sense, the sense of division. The sword in Ezekiel is a sword of discrimination, which separates the three holy individuals, Noah, Daniel, and Job, from those who have not been faithful to God. So the sword that Ezekiel is referring to here is a sword that divides one group from another group. And so Noah, Daniel, and Job are examples of three individuals from the Hebrew Scriptures who are very faithful to God. But yet there is division that happens in their lives. There is upsetment in their lives. There are hardships in their lives. And so the sword becomes a sword of division between those who follow God and those who do not follow God. So when we see this verse, we have to kind of look beyond maybe the literal understanding and say, well, what is the intention of Jesus here? What is he getting at? Simeon in the Christian scriptures also refers to the rise and fall of many in Israel, and the sword that will pierce Mary, and the thoughts of many hearts will be revealed in Luke 2:33 to 35. So there's that other understanding of the sword that is going to pierce Mary because of the difficulties that she will encounter as Jesus faces suffering, Jesus faces death, Jesus faces really a lack of understanding of his mission and what it's all about. So the sword really refers to that. It's not really a sense of battling and fighting and hurting people with swords. It's a different type of allusion here to the sword. And then Jesus says in verse 36, "For I have come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and one's enemies will be those of his own household." And again, as you read that, you're like, hey, wait a minute here. Aren't we supposed to be one happy family, work together? Isn't it the sense of love for your father, your mother, your siblings? What's happening here? This setting one against another. Why is this happening? And Jesus really has not come to bring division. Jesus has come to bring a message of good news. But his coming has provoked opposing responses. So it's not necessarily the message of Jesus that is causing the division. It is, well, what is our response? Of course, the important thing to note here is the significance of free will. We can either accept this teaching of Jesus or reject it, and when we reject it, if somebody else in our family has accepted it, we see the division that can result because of that. Then in verse 37, Jesus talks a little bit more about our discipleship and says, "Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me." So this idea of the attachments that we can sometimes have to other people and putting them before our attachment to Jesus and to the mission that Jesus gives us. And this again becomes a very challenging aspect. You certainly don't want to make division in a family. You don't want to get a father against the mother and against the sons and daughters. That's certainly not the goal here. But sometimes these things happen because the utter attachment to Jesus is required of a disciple. So a true disciple of Jesus puts Jesus first above everything else and everyone else. And that is a difficult call sometimes for us to make. What does it mean for me to put Jesus first? Well, we certainly find God's love revealed in our family relationships. The love that we have in that family is a sign, a deep sign of God's love for us. And it's not to be dismissed, it's not to be taken lightly. If we do not find God's love in those relationships, we will not be able to give it to others. So certainly that first aspect of our development with our families is so significant for us for the rest of our lives. Having that positive relationship with the mother and father is key, is crucial in our development, and is so important. If we go on a mission outside, though, of our home environment, we have to place our attachment to Jesus first. There might be times when it's a difficult challenge. We're outside of our home. We're trying to proclaim the message and putting Jesus first in those situations is an important aspect of being a disciple. And again, this is all said in the sense of balance and also the experience of the early Christian community. There were, of course, those who accepted the message of Jesus and welcomed it, but others in the family who did not. So there was this tension within the family. And even in our own day, we see that. We see that sometimes there are different choices that people make within a family. And it's hard. It's very difficult for people. And Jesus is saying, if you're a true disciple, if you're a complete disciple, if you're a devoted disciple, you put that relationship with Jesus first, above all other relationships. And that, of course, is an ongoing challenge for all